let's get started. So, my name's Alexis, and
my name is Bella.
And we are the president and vice president of Change the Stigma at USC. This is our website. Yeah, shout out to the e-board. Hello, everybody. Yeah. So basically, this is our website. You can find out a bunch of things through our resource hub. You can check out our work page and actually contribute to this new thing called Dear Black Bodies. This will take you to a Google form, and you can just submit like an open letter to Black Bodies, however you think you should respond. And then we'll publish it on the website, which is cool. But we're gonna start with our conversation. So here is the candid conversation model. So first, we're gonna check in with each other. Let me see how many people we have in here. I'm gonna quickly go over the rules of the conversation. Yeah, here we go. Stay in the room. So I guess since it's virtual, don't exit. Don't leave the conversation if it gets tough. Make no assumptions. So don't assume anything from what people are saying. Like, ask a question if you are confused. Be vulnerable. Speak from your personal experiences. Allow yourself to heal. So do or say what you feel is necessary in order for yourself to heal. Remember that different experiences exist. So just kind of respect everyone's perspectives. Be curious, not confused, and turn on your curiosity. So like I was saying before, ask questions as opposed to making assumptions. Allow your mind to be changed. Just know that it is okay to let go of beliefs you have when you are presented with new information. Safe space. This is a safe space, but that doesn't mean it's a comfortable space. So the conversation might get tense, but like, don't leave. Ask questions, talk it out. And then also allow each other literacy moments. So if you don't know what someone is talking about, rather than just being confused, just be like, literacy moment, and they'll be like, oh, POC means person of color. Problem solved. All right, so we're gonna do a quick little stretch. So everybody just stand up. Everybody just stand up where you are. We're just gonna do a little. We're just gonna do tilt your head to the right. And then forward. And then to the left. And finally to the back. Roll your shoulders forward a few times. Roll them back a few times. We're gonna bend down to our toesies. Hold that stretch for a little bit. We're gonna come back center and bow. Namaste. All right.
How the last year ended.
So we're gonna get crack-a-lackin' with our craction. I tried to make a pun. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with just like some information, and then I'm gonna pose a question. So just for some for info's sake, I'll just talk about like race and where it comes from. So basically, race, we existed for a long time without race, and then one day in the 17th century, someone decided to classify living things. So once classification became important to people, someone named Johann, he found a large skull in the Caucasus Mountains and assumed that these people must be the most intelligent. And bada bing, bada boom, we still hold that belief to be true, that white bodies are somehow superior to others. So the classifications he came up with were Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Australoid, and Negroid. So Caucasoid, Caucasus Mountains, that's where they come from. Mongoloids, those are the people in Mongols, you know, the Asian vibe. Then there's the Australoids. These are the indigenous people of, you know, Australia, also people of color. But then the Negroid, where do they come from? Negroland? Negrarnia?
Negrarnia.
I'm not sure. So that's where the problem began. There were over 130 classifications actually, but he stuck with these 4. So yeah, this science is not based on geography. Science is not based on geography, biology. He also said that there's no discernible difference between mankind, but his work would service the memory of the world. And so that is where our first conceptions of race came from. The rest of the notes, I feel like, is things that we will touch on anyways. So let's just...
You can return back to that.
Yeah, let's just... There's a lot of flies in the house. So we're just going to get started with the first question, which is... Let me navigate on my iPad. Got an iPad, guys.
We're a very...
All right.
Group.
So, got it. Boom. We're going to start with what is race and where did it come from? I think I just, we're just gonna move on to the next question, actually. So, let's go with, is there POC solidarity? So yeah, anybody who feels like they want to speak on that, they can just go for it. Alyssa.
I'm gonna flat out just say no, because I feel like every race has something against Black people. Like every race has deep-rooted anti-Blackness. From personal experiences, Latinos are very anti-Black people. That's all I mainly have to say from personal experience.
Yeah, I agree. No. A lot of the racism that I experienced growing up was from Asians and Latinos, kids in my community and in my school, not even just the white kids. So yeah, I would say no. And when you try to educate them, it's like, oh, well, but I'm Asian, I can't be racist. Oh, well, but I'm Mexican, I can't be racist. And it's like, if you're treating me differently because I'm Black, or if you're telling me that you'd never date a Black person, how is that not racist? Let me know, because I don't understand what you're saying. You know what I mean? Even a lot of my friends when I was in middle school and high school had anti-Black beliefs and feelings that they wouldn't try to educate themselves on, that they wouldn't address when I tried to bring it up with them. So I'd say no.
That's real. Personally, I think that POC is kind of a dangerous term because all people of color don't experience the same things at all. And then also POC can mean a lot of things. So it includes a lot of people. And I just feel like all of those struggles are just very different from the Black struggle in America. And just globally, Black bodies have just been hated since the beginning. And there's like Breland was saying, there's like anti-blackness in every culture. Like lighter skin is just, you know, the prize.
I'm gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate here and have a little fun with this question. But I think that like the thing that people refer to as people of color solidarity is just like different forms of racism that white people commit. And like I just feel like it's not what people actually think it is in terms of support, but rather the way that all people of color have slightly, to some extent, been affected by white supremacy and like just racism, because, you know, there's a lot of different types of racism. There's not only anti-Black racism. I would definitely say that's the worst and the most concerning, but also like, I think that like, for example, like I went to like a pretty much like all white school growing up. I went to like a pretty much all white school growing up. Like I lived in like the suburbs, like a very rich neighborhood of New York City where there was just like not as much diversity as in like New York City actually. And it was mostly white, and like all the Asian kids and like the couple of Black kids hung out simply because we all knew like the white kids were gonna be closer together than we were ever going to be with them. And obviously we didn't understand that in terms of like racism and like POC solidarity, but it was just the fact that like white supremacy manifests itself in so many ways and in early lifetimes. But I don't think that that is necessarily person of color, like solidarity. I just think it's like, we have all been affected by white supremacy to some extent, but the way that you have been affected by white supremacy, if you are a non-Black person of color, is nowhere near the way that I have been affected by white supremacy. So, and
that a weird thing that I saw at protests is that like people were kind of like repping their ethnicity, like they're like Latinas for Black lives. It's like, why are you out here repping? Like, just be for Black lives.
I feel like they're trying to create this nature of like POC solidarity, but like that's just not how we should be addressing it. Like we should be like, this is just white supremacy affecting all of us. It's not like it's a range, you know, it's not all the same. And also the term BIPOC, I honestly never knew what that meant. I thought it meant bisexual people of color. And I was like, fun. And then everyone's like, no. And I was like, okay, well, I'm leaving. So I have no idea what it means.
It means Black Indigenous people of color.
Oh, fun term. Just learning about it today.
I mean, I just feel like Indigenous people are people of color, so that's just a little bit confusing.
Also, like, what is Black Indigenous?
Black and Indigenous people.
Black and Indigenous, not Black.
It's like Black people, Indigenous people, and then also people of color.
No, it's Black or Indigenous people of color.
Black or Indigenous.
Okay, so it's just talking about Black or Indigenous people. That's it. Not like Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
Okay.
So it's basically saying that Black and Indigenous people are the most affected by white supremacy in America.
I think
so it's like saying like how like Indigenous people, you know, Indigenous women face like harsh rates of violence and like medical care, same as Black women. So it's like grouping those two groups together and recognizing that they have similar struggles.
That makes a lot more sense, but I feel like a lot of people understand it to be Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And like, that's why the term gets so misused. But like you saying that just now, I had no idea. And that clarifies like so many different arguments that I've seen on Twitter. And like, it's just crazy that it's just misinformation.
Yeah, I edited a paper about it and I didn't know that it meant that either. And I read about it and like, it's very useful if people knew what it meant, because again, like we're talking about different people of color experience different struggles, but like Black and Indigenous people have similar struggles in the context of American society, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
But also, like, I really liked Al's point about white supremacy, and I read a piece, and it's called like the 3 pillars of white supremacy, and it basically explains how like different people experience white supremacy in different ways. And I think it was like Black people have like slavery / capitalism, and then there's also like genocide / colonialism, and that's how like Indigenous people, and then Asian people and like other people that immigrated here later, they have like Orientalism and war. So it's like everyone experiences a different kind of white supremacy, and if you categorize them in those ways, you can like better understand how white supremacy affects us all, instead of just being like racism. Because when we're like racism is just like so general. But if you realize that like white supremacy has like different degrees of like closeness to whiteness, like when you're closer to whiteness, you have a better experience, but it's still white supremacy. So I was like on point with that. And I think if we like expand how we look at white supremacy, we get a better understanding of people of color. But when we're just like, oh, people of color all need to stand together, it's like, well, all people of color have different struggles, so it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I think it's way too much of a blanket term.
Real. All right. So I guess let's go into the psychological effects of race. And race is a dehumanizing force on both Black and white people. So I'm gonna speak to the way that it psychologically affects Black people. So just some of the language that we use: white lies, blacklist, devil's food cake, angel's food cake. What color is a devil's food cake? And what color is an angel's food cake?
I've never heard of these cakes.
Angel's food cake is like the
Really?
fluffy white cake, and devil's food cake is chocolate.
Oh.
So
Are these actual like cakes or metaphors?
they're cake, real
They're
cake.
actual cakes, apparently.
Okay.
So yeah, just a lot of the language that we use have forced us to internalize the idea that white is right.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a person? Do you all consider yourselves people of color?
I'm Black.
Weird term.
I'm a Negro. I don't
Yeah,
like being called a person of color.
I would rather be called
Person of
Black.
color, they say Black.
Ariana Grande can be a person of color. Like if we're throwing
Yeah.
that, like
I'm sorry. What'd you say again?
I said that Ariana Grande could be a person of color, which was a bit irrelevant, but also an underlying thing that white people tan themselves to be of color and look like a different race, which is also why I feel like a person of color is just like a strange term, because like, what does that really mean? Like you have color on you, like you have melanin in you, like what does it really mean?
That's interesting because growing up, I was a colored girl. Okay. And the 60s is when, after civil rights, is when we went from being colored people to being Black people, which basically meant that you embraced your Blackness over and above any of the miscegenation that we experienced by being assimilated into white supremacy. But if we think of it from a genetic perspective, there's no one on the planet that does not have some DNA that is from the continent where we all come from. So from that premise, everybody's a person of color.
Exactly, and why I would never identify as something like, I just say I'm Black.
Yeah.
And if we identify only as Black people, then this concept that has been pretty much gone across the globe in a very quick span of time, calling ourselves minorities. When you talk about the psychological terms of devil's food cake and, you know, all those terms that we internalize, internalizing that you're a minority is even something else. And I don't see how you can be a minority if you're part of being people of color. Just a thought. Another perspective.
So for white people, racism also has a psychological effect on them,
Yes.
And they may take over a conversation unintentionally, or take charge of something they don't need to take charge of. But I can't speak to that experience because I'm not a white person.
But it's just like this. It's like if I identify myself as a minority, which I refuse to do, what is inferred is that white people are the majority. And white people are not the majority. So what are we saying? The dichotomy of it, what are we saying by identifying in this way?
Well, I think that a lot of times it was simply the labels that we were taught in school and didn't really give much thought to it because it was a stage of our lives where we weren't understanding like the massive structures of racism and white supremacy. And a lot of times, like especially white people like here at USC, like this is really the first time that they're forced into having these complicated conversations, like really thinking about the way that they enforce white supremacy. And I just think that like our educational system does not do a good job of really going into like the fact we should actually be thinking about these things and not just internalizing it and like teaching us. And I think that minority was a thing that I was taught was like politically correct and like the correct way to address like what we now call people of color, but even now we're talking about that's not the best word. And I think that this is just an issue of like, why didn't they let us like think about these things? Once again, enforcement of white supremacy, where they just assign this word to us and made us internalize it in early education, and we accepted it. And it's not right, but I think that a lot of the conversation is very fresh and
Right, because in saying I'm a minority, do we call white people majority? I just had this conversation with some people last weekend. Because I said, so, because she said, well, you're a minority. I says, no, I'm a majority. I'm like 3/4 of the planet. Water, it's everywhere. People of color, everywhere. White people are the minority. But we have acculturated ourselves to this terminology because do they call themselves majorities?
Hopefully not.
No, but we've been tagged minority. Psychologically, that gives over to them being majority. Again, another caste system or hierarchical system where I'm less than, you're better than. It's all very psychological, but whatever.
I have just a quick question. Because one of my professors taught us about the quota systems that happened. The same person that came up with those like classifications for people that Alexis was talking about when talking about race, he also like was the reason for a quota system where it was like X many people could come from this country to America, and like not because I don't like, just because out of curiosity, like to me minority, when I hear it, it's like numerically there are less than, like not anything about like how they are as people, just like the number of them. And like from my understanding, the reason that it is because like the trickling down from the quota system is like there were just like an overwhelming number of white people who were allowed to be in this country versus people from different like non-white countries.
It is part of the quota system that was devised by the very same people that named people of color minority. I mean, if you look at it demographically, what's the largest population in the planet?
I don't know about the whole planet.
Well, there's 7.5 billion people. Asians are the most populated. I mean, there's a lot of folks in China, okay? Then next to that is India, the real India, not the one where they have naval people, Indians, but India. I know I've only got 3 minutes, right? And then after that, we have this huge continent that still has all the world's natural resources they call Africa. If you were to put those people of color, how in the world are white people the majority. But as long as we're thinking in this manner, it's very psychological, where we are not as much as, is what I'm saying.
I think that also brings up a really good point about the fact that the term minority is from a very Eurocentric point of view.
That's my point.
Look at it in the global scale, we are not minorities. Like, that's just
Exactly.
So it's specifically Eurocentric, and specifically also surrounding the idea that America and Europe needs to be like white people and needs to be like a majority white people.
Exactly.
We need to be the minority. And that's why we need to think about these terms, because like we were explained a very different way.
Right.
Not told like this is like a Eurocentric term. This was developed in a Eurocentric point of view. This is not actually factually true. We were just like, this is what you call Asian, Black, Latino.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like,
Also, can I just take just a moment to congratulate Dr. Kane on getting her master's in business, on finishing. Yeah. Thank you, Nina, for using our handy dandy reaction tool.
Yeah, business school is there now. That is that's a school.
But I thought that I would give a hot take. So a lot of people argue about what acts of racism are. And this conversation that I had in an Undoing Racism workshop is that all white people are racist and that Black people cannot be racist. Here's why. Here's why. If you determine like, all right, so basically racist to me means that you wake up benefiting from the system disproportionately. And you don't have to do anything to be racist. You are benefiting from a system from race, therefore you are racist. Now I know that's not how it's like taught or defined conventionally. But if you think about it, if we got rid of all the people that we consider racist, racism would still exist. Like if we took all the racist people and sent them to a different planet, the racist people, and sent them to a different planet, and there were still white people in existence, racism would still exist. Therefore, are those people not racist for benefiting from the system of race? So yeah, that's just how I think about racism. And I don't think of it as like these actions, these overt actions of just like prejudice. I think that's what it is, prejudice, acts of prejudice. But I just think that we really misuse the word racist and racism, and just yeah. Food for thought.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting argument because from what I understand, in the academic like Eurocentric sense, what you're saying is Eurocentric or institutionalized racism, which like that's not how we see it. So like if you're arguing with a white person and you say you can't be racist, they're going to interpret that as, oh, Black people can't be prejudiced to white people, when like that's possible. Like you can have preconceived notions, but when we say racist, we're talking about two very different things. And I think it's important to recognize that when you're having discussions with people who don't share the same kind of common understandings of the phrases used.
I agree.
I think that there can't be racism without like power and also power structures. So kind of like what you guys were saying. So if there was no power structure that put white people at the top and white people were just like, I don't like Black people, that would be a whole different understanding of racism, because that didn't affect their livelihood or their job, or, you know, then that would be not how that would be a different kind of prejudice. But because it always will, it's racism. And when you say Black people can't be racist, it's you kind of like I was talking about before, there's like a hierarchy. So when you're at the bottom and you have no power to affect the system, you can't actually be racist because your dislike of white people or Asian people isn't going to affect the way they live, the way they work, the way that they conduct themselves, because you have no power to do so. And even if you're not actively racist when you're white, you still benefit from racist systems. So you go into a job and you don't have anything against Black people, but you're not as qualified as your neighbor, and you get the job. Therefore, that was racist. You're contributing to racist systems. So there's ways when you're white to like unlearn your racism and check your privilege, but you're always going to benefit from a racist system. So I agree, because I think racism without power can't be racism. I talk really fast. I'm sorry, you guys.
No, perfect speed.
Yeah, that's honestly tea, because I think about this a lot. A lot of, you know, like the stereotype, well, it's not the stereotype, it's kind of the truth, that white people are richer than Black people. The only reason that is because we were enslaved for hundreds of years. So no matter what, like the only reason that you have the wealth that you have is because your ancestors oppressed mine. Like that's the only reason. You know what I mean? So like you're still gonna be racist as long as you benefit from that wealth that was, you know, taken from the work that my ancestors did and that we continue to do, like the generational trauma that we continue to endure. So yeah, that's tea. I agree.
Anybody else got some tea to spill? All right, we can move on to another question, maybe. We can move on to a new topic. So let's just get into prisons and policing while we have the time. So let's just evaluate the link between prisons, white supremacy, and I mean, obviously slavery. So like, if anyone wants to jump in and talk about how those
Prisons replace slavery. That's all I have to say.
I agree. I watched 13th, I think that's, yeah, on Netflix, where it talks about the whole system, yeah, and the whole incarceration system and how it was basically just a more structured way of slavery, and how it still affects us greatly today, especially when it comes to voting and having a voice in our current political society. If you were someone convicted of any sort of felon, and oftentimes I feel like white people have gotten like just a slap on the wrist for a lot of things that Black people have been put in prison for or even wrongly accused for. So yeah.
So then we can also just talk about the problem with our policing system. I'll just start with the fact that like policing, just how it began is just completely disgusting. Like it went from slave catchers, and that's what they still are. Like what they're trying to do is like collect slaves for this just completely trashed system. And I think it's just really weird how it's in our law that like slavery is like outlawed unless they commit a crime. And then boom, Black people are being arrested for crimes at a disproportionate rate. So it's like, how is that like completely gone on certain people that this is happening before our eyes? Yeah, I'll just pass it off to everyone else.
I don't know who the young lady was that said, I think I know Elle said something, but someone else was talking about how we aren't taught. It might have been the young man. Because if people really understood, I know so many Black people that say, well, if you commit a crime, you should do the time. Completely not understanding how the system works, that we finance. I don't think people understand that 95% of the people that are in prison are there because they fit a description, they were arrested, and they can't afford to post bail. That's it. That's pretty much how the quota works.
What is even up with the bail system? Like, how is that valid that you can get out of punishment because you have money?
Well, if you have the money, then you can actually get your money back if after their hearing you are found not guilty. But most people who are arrested are people who live at a certain socioeconomic status, so they can't afford to post the full bail, so they have to pay a bail bondsman. So they don't get that back. And who wants to stay in prison because they take so long for hearings to come up? So then they take plea bargains. So prosecutors are even more powerful than judges at this point. They take plea bargains. Now you have a prison sentence, a felony, and pretty much now you are part of the system. It's just, and people, I believe that voting does do something. The midterm elections to me was more proof where these 4 women were able to get in there and turn some things around. But if we don't even utilize that particular tool, just like social media can be used in a very positive way, then we won't see the change to some of these systems that work very ardently to maintain themselves. The Tea Party didn't happen until about 15 years ago. And, you know, if you mention that to people, they're like, well, what's the Tea Party got to do with anything? It has a lot to do with everything.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I think we're one of only 2 nations that utilizes cash bails.
Yeah.
And the fact that that still happened. I don't think enough people are focused on that as one of the primary means of incarceration
Right.
for people of lower socioeconomic
Yeah, it's a cash
statuses.
cow. I mean, the police
Exactly,
are incentivized. And like the last week of the month, I told my students, don't go out, especially if you're a Black or brown male, don't go out, because even though it's illegal, they fill their quota systems.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, you have civil asset forfeiture, which is the legal theft of literally anything that they can take without any due process. Which those 2 things absolutely need to be outlawed.
And we can't do that unless you people become the accountants, the lawyers, the this, the that, the other, that are part of changing these systems.
Yes, so accounting.
I have nothing to say about that, but I was gonna say I also don't think that like people understand how much money prisons make.
Oh,
the fact that like people who own prisons are literally like billionaires, and they love what they do, and they love putting people in jail because it makes them so much money, and it makes so many people so much money, and it's like viewed as like a good investment. Like people will tell you like invest in prisons because you're gonna have like 110% rate of return, and like that's true, but also like why the fuck are you investing in like enslaving people and like free labor? Like, but people like don't.
But people don't know they're investing in it. I mean, I'm sure some of you ladies own some Victoria's Secret lingerie, right?
Nah, Victoria's Secret sucks.
Okay.
What I was talking about. I was talking about like the big investors in it, like how like fucking like Pete Buttigieg, like he makes a lot of money off of prisons and he doesn't like actually like do anything like for them, but like it's just like these like big investors who like get in these conversations with like these evil ass prison owners, and like it's a very tight circle, and like we don't like, I don't think people understand that like these are also people that we elect, and like these people that we elect like for fucking Congress and Joe Biden himself, like they make billions of dollars off of prisons, and there's just no way that like if you elect someone who's making billions of dollars off of prisons, do you really think they're going to want to defund the police? Like, do you really think they're going to want to change the judicial system at all? No. And I don't think people understand that, and you really have to be careful where you put your vote, because if you put your vote towards someone like that, prisons are only going to thrive. They're going to keep making billions of dollars.
So, but there's more than one way to vote. You can vote at the ballot or whatever, which a lot of people are pretty disenchanted with, but there's other ways you can vote.
with your money.
With your money, what you do or what you don't buy. I mean, you can be sitting at a meeting where people are talking about privatized prison, but everybody's got a bottle of water on the table. That's financing the very things that we're talking about.
I definitely agree with boycotting. I also think boycotting itself has some issues with classism and elitism because, for example, like McDonald's, Walmart, Macy's, Nordstrom Rack, like all of these like big discount stores that target like lower class, lower income people for deals and like couponing, they invest in these big prisons, but then these people who are buying from them don't have the money to be choosy. Like a lot of homeless people love McDonald's because they can get the dollar menu. Like you get $4 from somebody and you can get 4 items for you to nourish yourself. So it's also like these companies are targeting lower income people because they know that those people are very dependent on their deals and pricing. So I don't think that we could just apply boycotting to everyone. And I think that talking about voting with your money is a very itself like not elitist perspective, but you need to realize like there is a privilege for you to vote with your money.
Well, I don't see it as a boycott. I like this because now I'm getting a little stirred up here. I don't see it as a boycott. Like I haven't walked into a Rouse in years. Like I believe that if I support the farmers directly, then I can disenfranchise a lot of the supply chain. Because if I say, well, McDonald's is the best I can do, I'm sorry, I can do a lot better buying myself bulk beans and cooking myself black beans, red beans, whatever, eating these kinds of staples versus I don't eat at McDonald's. And people say, well, yeah, you make this kind of money. I think people are assuming I make a certain amount of money. I think you can vote with your dollar and make decisions, just small things you can do that can, if done collectively, can make a difference. It's the same thing. I'll go back to this because a lot of people are familiar with this. When they decided, well, fine, if I can't sit anywhere I want on your bus, I'm not going to ride it. That broke the back of that particular business at that particular point in time. If we only look at what we can't do as if we are powerless to people, there will be no change.
I think I definitely agree with what you're saying, but I'm saying that as a promotional, like in a way that what am I going to tell my peers who come from like lower income backgrounds? Like, what do you tell like homeless Black people? I don't think that I would ever tell them to vote with their money because that at the end of the day is not effective for them. It hurts them because they rely on these companies for deals.
But they don't get deals. That's my point.
I think that's where education comes in because like they probably are like, well, when it comes to homeless people, they don't have kitchens. So like there's nothing.
That's different.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm talking about though. Like I'm talking about these like homeless people who are like very reliant on these businesses because they're so cheap. And like, how are you going to tell those people to like that these companies are terrible and that you shouldn't buy from them? Like you can't do that. It's just not going to be effective for them. Like it's going to majorly just eradicate like a lot of their nourishment. And it's very sad, but also I think that with activism, we need to include the people at the bottom and look at the different levels of how different people can access activism. So that's why I just feel like voting with the dollar, and especially like, I know amongst college students, like, yes, we're all at a very rich institution, but like, we're paying thousands of dollars for this. Like, I don't have money after I spend $35,000 like worth of tuition. Like that makes sense. And
so let me ask you something. Yeah. You think it's more, I'm trying to think of the word. I can't think of it right now, but it's more advantageous to eat at McDonald's than for you to go and buy staples and cook?
Not me personally.
Okay.
I'm not talking about myself. I recognize that I am in a privileged position, but I'm talking about people that I interact with, and I know for a fact that some people simply cannot afford to have like buy groceries and like buy really like be smart with their money, like do these things that I try to do to like boycott and like.
I hear you loud and clear because I work with grocery ships over in South Central.
I'm not talking.
And we hear this all the time.
I'm not talking about myself. But
No. I'm saying grocery ships is when you're working with women who are on subsidy, and teaching these people how to, because really that McDonald's hamburger is subsidized by the tax dollar. That's why they can sell it so cheap. And it really isn't food. It really is a food byproduct. So investing in these particular places, I believe even people on the lower end of the economic and the bottom of the pyramid can invest with their decisions and what they do with their dollar in a way that disenfranchises rather than financing the very people sticking you in your behind. But I'm gonna stop talking.
I mean, I would wish to think that, but like I have done a lot of community work with homeless people in the area, and I see that a lot of them rely on these fast food places, and this is where their money simply gets spent because it's most accessible. They don't have forms of transportation. They're literally homeless, and it's just like, I cannot pitch them that idea. It feels wrong to me.
Okay.
Oh, kind of to help you, like to support your point, like also we kind of have to think about poverty and like lower income is not only about money, it's also about like accessibility, like you're talking about. It's about time. So though like McDonald's might not be necessarily a cheaper option than getting like groceries, but not everyone has the time or the resources to cook a whole meal, or you know, if you don't have a running refrigerator, how are you going to store that meal? So there's like a lot of other things that go into why options like McDonald's are accessible for people who are homeless or even people who are low income. So like I agree with what Ella is saying, and I think if you take like the bus boycotts, there were actual solutions to get people to and from work. Like black taxi cab companies came into effect at that time. So if we're gonna advise that people use these other options, we're gonna have to provide solutions for these options and accessible solutions. So we can't just be like, oh yeah, like don't go to Walmart, don't go to McDonald's, just, you know, go to a farmer's market. Like you, so like that's not really viable for a lot of people. So if we're gonna,
but it's a lot more viable than people think it is. Am I still?
Yeah, it is, but not everyone has access to that kind of environment.
But most people who say they don't have access haven't even attempted to have access. And I'm only belaboring this because I actually work in this. I work over in South Central, and I work with women and women that are on welfare, women who have got 10 kids and they're 38 years old and they believe this is all they can do. And once they are able to see that there is a different way to do this, then they can do it. Because not only that, but eating and sustaining yourself on McDonald's is not a healthy thing to do anyway. It's why in COVID, our population were the people who were most impacted when it came to fatalities, because we live sick, because we sustain ourselves in a fashion where we stay sick. And we've got to be able to address those issues more realistically than, well, this is the best I can do. Well, I don't think you can. I personally think buying beans and other staples and buying directly from farmers, not even the market. I mean, the farmers will come to you, vice versa. You can make an exchange. There's a church I work at where the farmers exchange people for things that they do, babysitting, whatever, because there are ways in order for people to get out of this wheel of like, you know, they're so powerful, there's nothing we can do about it. There's lots of things that can be done. There's lots of innovation that can go forward.
Yeah, innovation is the key. I think it's like on businesses and entrepreneurs to create resources for people that don't have them.
I understand what you're saying, but also what you're doing for these homeless people is a very important resource, and also a bit of a rare resource, and providing nutritional literacy, financial literacy of how to spend your money. And this is a resource that not a lot of homeless people have access to. And it's a great resource, of course, and you are valid in doing all these things and completely correct. But we also, LA is just also a bit weird, because I'm thinking about like when I lived back in New York City, like there's no natural vegetables that are easy to access. Like you are really like just going to walk into a deli and get that $3 grilled cheese, and like that is going to be your meal. Like there's no And especially like in the winters, like there's just no like fresh produce that is not like insanely expensive. And that's just the reality of it. And maybe you can connect people with intense work and intense planning, but like these people are desperate. They don't have these resources. So I don't think that you can.
I would like to do some movement espresso right now. So we're just gonna stand again, and we're gonna do a full body shake. Just shake it out. Just shake it out. Just shake it out. Maybe you didn't have your mouth open. Let it out. Shaking too. All right, I think we.
No, but like T, let me jump in on that because honestly, yeah, that's true that there's other options and stuff. That doesn't mean that people have access to that or that anybody is telling them like, hey, you can go to the farmer's market. Oh, hey, there is a farmer's market here. Like in Northside Long Beach, it's a food desert. There's not accessible, inexpensive, fresh produce like Elle was saying that people can have access to. There's nobody telling them, oh, make yourself some rice and beans and that'll last you a while. Get canned beans, get rice, get some fresh produce, da 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 da. People don't have that access. So until people like get the resources to, gain access to those things, like you can't, hold them responsible for their own oppression. They don't have the knowledge available to them to be able to even do those things yet, which is why organizations and churches and everything is important, and it's important to donate to them as well. But it's just like it's just an access issue. A lot of people just don't have the knowledge and time. Like if your mom is working 2 or 3 jobs, if you're going to school and you're in after school programs and you come home at 7-8 p.m. and your mom doesn't get home until like midnight or 1 a.m., like how are you going to know how to cook unless somebody else comes from the outside and teaches you? And who is going to come into your neighborhood and say, hey, do you know how to cook? Let me teach you. Like there's not a lot of people doing that, all over the country. So until that's something that's accessible to all people of lower socioeconomic status, people can't be held responsible for, the bad morals of big corporations. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to survive. They can't thrive.
I think the thing that I'm saying is I am that mother that worked 2 jobs and came home and cooked. I mean, I've been there. My mother worked in sweatshops. Not that I'm trying to say, oh, I'm right or whatever, but there was a time when we could not even afford, there was a time when there wasn't even a McDonald's, and people survived and people sustained themselves and people didn't give way to buying things in places that again feed the very oppression that they endure. It is possible. People.
That's true, but a lot of people just don't know.
But just because you don't know today doesn't mean you don't have to move towards tomorrow. Because other than that, I can see why people feel overwhelmed because they don't think there's anything they can do about it. But there is something you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots you can do about it.
There is, but they just need to know what they can do. A lot of people just don't know.
Like this group right here, we can do something about it.
We can do something about it, but we can't help every single homeless person in New York City in the winter when they don't have anything.
Because I'm from New York City, right? So
I'm like, how are you going to place like the responsibility of these workers?
I feel like she's not trying to place the responsibility on the individual, but it's like a collective, and it's our job to inform the people around us and inform our communities. Where it's like, like one person is not about to end homelessness. Like, like it's not that simple. But it's like I see where both y'all are coming from. Like Elle is just
white people are not as powerful as they project themselves to be. They really aren't the majority. I mean, they really aren't. But people have been conditioned to think this is the way it is. It can't be any other way. And I'm saying, I'm so old. I remember when there was no McDonald's, when we didn't have plastic. I mean, that's how old I am. So there are other things that people can do.
I saw something that said activism is my rent for living on the planet or something like that.
Alice Walker.
And I think that's like a great way to look at life, because I think so many people think that activism is like something that a certain group of people does, but really,
We'll do it.
If more people thought of themselves as activists, I feel like we could accomplish so much more and reach a lot of people. Like,
Yes.
there's not like I feel like there's not enough like there aren't enough activists to like solve all of these social problems. But I think that if we like more people saw themselves as activists and were more comfortable with having these conversations and like actually engaging with these populations of people, that would be like the most powerful thing that we could like do.
Like this group right here. You're college students, so don't punch me in the face. But could you all afford $5 a month?
You don't pay no more.
I'm glad I'm not there.
Look real scary sometimes.
Okay, because $5 a month, you could buy enough produce to feed a family of 4 people. If you go directly to the farmers,
For the whole month?
you could buy, no, not for a whole family, you can for like 2 weeks worth. You can get 2 weeks worth of produce, organic, not pesticide laden produce. And I'm kind of pissed because I've gone to churches in South Central, and because of the profit margin, they don't want to do it. I buy a basket for myself, and I can also buy a basket for these people because the farmers want me to shop local. Now in New York, same thing. Out on the island, they have it. In different parts of Jersey, they have it. But because of the inclement weather, you have to learn how to make things at certain seasons so that you'll have them for other seasons.
Can I ask which churches you're talking about? Because I'm literally like I
In
live
South
off
Central?
of Manchester. Yeah, I'm off Manchester, Normandy.
You want me to badmouth the church?
No, I'm asking like which
I don't have a
churches have
problem with
farmers
it.
markets. I mean, if you want to, we have time for that. But like, I'm just asking like which churches that you know have farmers markets.
No. I'm saying I've gone to churches and asked them, but a lot of the churches don't want to do it because of the profit margin. They're not going to gain enough from it. But it's not what you're monetarily gaining, it's what you're doing in the community. I mean, you're supposed to be spreading the love of Christ and all that.
It's an investment.
Right.
Yeah. So then which farmers markets are you going to? Like, I just want to know where they are in South.
There's one right off of Exposition where they have that little garden right there. I'm not the best with directions and streets. There's one in Inglewood. There's one over by Crenshaw High School. I'm trying to think of the ones, and I do a lot in the community that I live in. Y'all gonna be like, and this lady don't even live in the Black community, but that's because I want to live by the beach. And or my daughter gets this kind of backlash too because my son-in-law is white and she writes a blog on racism. So people are like, well, you can't be married to somebody and talk about racism. It's a really interesting malaise of attitudes because when it really boils down to it, we all our hiney holes point to the ground and we all straddle 2 feet. So if I take on this burden of I'm Black and I've got to not think or even stand with another human being, I don't really see where that solves much.
I don't know if we're gonna end soon, but I know I need to go to the bathroom.
I'll be quiet for the rest of the time.
Back to not back to it, but I think that something that I've realized right now is a lot of people's form of activism immediately goes to monetary motivation and donations, and I think that's a very big part of what a lot of people consider activism, like putting your money where your mouth is. And it's very upsetting at times like these when you are Black and in a position where you want to give, but I'm a college student. My parents don't really support me at all. like I'm living off of savings and it's just not in my monetary, it's not in my bank account to like give to these things because that's taking food away from my mouth. And it's just, I can't do it. So I think that a lot of times we need to also talk about non-monetary ways that we can give back to the community, and exactly what you were talking about, Lisa, just providing resources, giving people financial literacy programs. Like that's a great resource that you can, like I can give, like as an accounting major, like financial literacy to like lower income families, and using the knowledge that you have and all of the resources you have that are not necessarily monetary to give back to communities, and enforcing that in your activism. And I just wanted to say, like, if anyone here, because I know I'm probably not the only one in the same position where like I don't have money to give, like don't feel discouraged, find another form of activism because it's probably just not your avenue, but that doesn't mean you can't make an impact.
All right, I think that Elle gave us a good place to wrap. It's been a great conversation. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna unmute everyone at once. I think that's something that I can do with my tools. And then we'll all say goodbye to each other. Yes, I can do that. Wait, I don't know how to do it.
You have to go to
Participants. All right, I'm gonna figure it out, guys. So I'm gonna mute everyone, and then I'm gonna, wait.
Allow all to unmute. Ask all to unmute.
All right, everybody unmute. Everybody say your goodbyes, your thank yous, your gratitude.
Bye.
Thank you for letting me participate so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
I'll send out more info on another conversation because there's more to be talked about. All right, stay tuned.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to me.